Welcome. Congressman Keith Ellison, Dean Eric Schwartz, distinguished members of our panel, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Iran nuclear deal, pros and cons, a roundtable discussion. My name is MJ Shahidi. I am the current Vice President of the United Nations Association of Minnesota. We are affiliated with the United Nations Association of the United States of America, which a few years ago merged with the United Nations Foundation. We here in Minnesota, however, take pride by calling ourselves the Harold E. Stassen Division, named after our own colorful and endeared governor, who became the first Minnesotan, from what I'm told, and I remember, to sign the Charter of the United Nations. Am I correct? And in 1945, his actions, his deed and his action, combined with those of other American and world visionaries, created an indispensable international forum whose successes outweigh its failures many times over. I am pleased now to introduce two colleagues, two educators, two human rights advocates, who are the current co-presidents of UNA here in Minnesota. Ms. Diane Clayton from Hamline University, and Ms. Randy Markison from Post-Genocide Education Foundation. They will explain to you briefly the main activities of UNA Minnesota.
Thank you so much. On behalf of the United Nations Association of Minnesota, welcome in the spirit of peaceful resolution. We're very excited to sponsor this debate today. Just a few housekeeping things. Please turn off your cell phones if you haven't already. And for those of you who'd like to come in closer, the reserved spots are now free, so come on down. I am proud to introduce my co-president, who will talk about the signature program of the UNA Minnesota, which is our Model UN program.
I'd like to echo Diane's welcome, and pleased to see all of you. The Model UN program is really one of our strongest programs, and I'd just like to give you some statistics about how we're doing. First of all, I'd like to say we're very innovative, and we're quite proud of that. It's an international education program. It engages students who are in grades 7 through 12, both in the classroom and in Model UN simulations. And the program gives the students time and the opportunity to study human rights issues, peace, security, economic, and sustainable development problems. So for the 2014-2015 school year, we have, which I think is pretty impressive, we served over 3,000 students, 73 teachers, and we were in 52 schools. Since 2004, we've served 16,840 students and 223 teachers in the Model UN program. So if you have a chance and are interested, please go to our website and learn even more. Again, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. And since 2007, Mr. Keith Ellison has represented the 5th Congressional District of Minnesota in U.S. Congress with distinction. In March of this year, anticipating that the Iran deal would create a very serious and passionate debate, he suggested to me organizing a possible forum, such as the one we are about to start. He had the foresight, the knowledge, and the graciousness to want people from all sides to debate the issue. Now, I am therefore delighted and honored that Congressman Ellison accepted our invitation unequivocally to come to this event. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you Congressman Ellison.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to see such a full house tonight to discuss this critical issue affecting our country and many, many others. This is a big deal, and your presence tonight shows that you know that. I want to give very strong thanks to the United Nations Association of Minnesota and my good friend Jay Shahidi. And I also want to thank the Humphrey School, the Hubert Humphrey School, where we're in right now. Eric Schwartz, a good friend of mine, even before he became the dean of the Humphrey School. And I could tell you the truth. I used to think the world of I still think the world of Brian Atwood. And when he left, I was worried, how in the world are we going to fill these big shoes? Brian Atwood is leaving as dean of the Humphrey School. And you can imagine how happy I was when I heard that Eric Schwartz would be that person. I had the opportunity as a member of Congress to talk with Eric Schwartz when he was Assistant Secretary of State and working on issues of migration and humanitarian affairs. He had an awesome and distinguished career there. He is doing the same here. Eric, thank you so much for everything you are and what you're doing for our school here. I also want to say that there was a very smart man who said that the clash of ideas is the sound of freedom. I'm not sure who said it, probably one of you do. Having difference of opinion is okay. It's fine. It is the inheritance of every American to be able to offer their views in a frank, candid way, have those views respected, and at the end of the process, understand that there's going to be another process, and we may have different views on that, and sometimes people who agree on one thing today disagree tomorrow, and people who agree today disagree tomorrow, and that's just the way our system is designed. So what we're doing now is a very constitutional exercise, a very American exercise, it's a very democratic exercise, and I'm glad we're all here to participate in it. We got a great panel. I'm not going to introduce them, but I want to thank the panel from the very beginning for your participation and you offering your candid views on this critical subject. Let me be as quick as I can, and I mean to be quick. It wasn't more than 20 months ago that intensive negotiations between the P5+1 and Iran concluded a joint plan of action. The nations, Russia, China, Germany, UK, and France, came together to discuss how we were going to stop Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. And that deal, the deal that now Congress is faced with approving or disapproving, was concluded a short time ago. I'm going to share with you what some of the key provisions are just for the purpose of the discussion. Iran's enriched uranium stockpile will be reduced by roughly 97%. Iran reduces a number of centrifuges from 19,000 to about 5,600. This provision lasts for 10 years. No accumulation of enriched uranium through the advanced centrifuges for 10 years. Afterwards, Iran will phase out its first generation centrifuges. All enrichment will be at the Natanz facility for 15 years. Enrichment capped at 3.67%, which is an energy-related level of enrichment. For context, 20% plus is considered weapons grade. Fordow will be converted into a research facility with no centrifuges, will accumulate enriched uranium. Iran will redesign and rebuild their Iraq heavy water reactor so that it does not produce weapons-grade plutonium. And Iran will ship spent fuel out of the country and forgo reprocessing. This is designed to shut down the plutonium route. There is a system of verification and inspection. Iran will ratify the additional protocol with the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and this will make intrusive inspections, including at the Parchin military site, permanent. Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency will come to a resolution on the investigation into prior possible military dimensions to Iran's nuclear program. Iran permits intrusive monitoring throughout Iran's entire nuclear supply chain for decades. We're on the issue of sanctions. Nuclear-related U.S. and EU sanctions will be lifted only when the International Atomic Energy Association verifies that Iran has undertaken its nuclear-related commitments. Sanctions specifically targeting Iran's support for international terrorism and its human rights abuses will remain in place. The arms embargo placed by the UN sanctions will be removed if Iran complies for 5 years for traditional weapons and 8 years for ballistic weapons. A joint commission made up of negotiating countries will be created to ensure that Iran is complying and that sanctions can be snapped back if there is a breach. Now, I personally am going to get some work to do on this issue. Congress has until mid-September to review the deal. The president has said he will veto any action by Congress that would prevent the implementation of the deal. So the question is whether or not there are enough votes to override a veto. With regard to the House of Representatives, opponents of the deal need 290 votes to override the president's veto. If all the Republicans vote no, which they're expected to, 44 Democratic no votes are needed to override the veto. 151 of 188 House Dems have signed a letter supporting the deal. This is 7 more yes votes than are needed to uphold a veto. So this is 7 more yes votes than are needed to uphold a veto. In the Senate, opponents need 67 votes to override Obama's veto. If all Republicans vote no, which they're expected to, they need 13 Democratic no votes to override a veto. 28 of 46 Senate Dems are yes votes. Opponents of the deal need 13 of the remaining 18 Democratic senators to go no. And recently, we had leaders in the Senate, including Menendez and Schumer, say they oppose the deal, and then Senator Reid said he supports it. It's not at all clear how the remainder are going to shake out. The debate. There has been and will be a vigorous debate around this deal. The fact is that this debate has taken place in Congress, has taken place within the cabinet of the White House itself, and it's taken place throughout America, including right here. I want to say, and many of you who are here probably already know, that I do support the deal. But I want to thank everyone in part of the debate, including the people who have opposed it. And the reason why is because even the people who support it knew and they know that unless the deal is exacting, verifiable, and intrusive in terms of inspections, that it's never going to be passable by Congress or the American people. So it's not a bad thing that there is a strong deal in place and everybody played a part in what I believe is a good deal, including the people who've been skeptical all along. So with that, I simply want to say thank you for being attentive to the needs of our country. This democracy, the American system, is made to be lobbied, it's made to be worked on, it's made to be a system in which you communicate the people who represent you, and in this case, at least in the 5th District of Minnesota, that's me. So I do appreciate every comment, every point of view, and I will be here for the entire process tonight because I want to hear the entire debate, because even though I do have my own ideas about what's the right course of action, I've shared that, I do look forward to learning more with an idea to being better informed in order to better represent you in Congress. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Congressman Ellison. Ladies and gentlemen, my colleague at the United Nations Association who helped me organize this event, Mr. Stu Ackman, contacted the Republican members of Minnesota's delegation. We did not get confirmation from everybody. And we will begin the debate shortly, but I'm indeed pleased that we are pleased that Mr. Eric Schwartz, the Dean of Humphrey School of Public Affairs here at the University of Minnesota, graciously and courageously offered us this magnificent and iconic facility. And he agreed to be the presiding officer tonight and also moderate the discussion, debate, whatever you call it. So Stu Ackman will be here at the end of the debate, which will be approximately 85, 90 minutes. And there will be plenty of time for your questions and answers and comments. But the dean is such a young, wise man who suggested that we would honor Congressman Ellison separately and not as part of the team, because he wanted the discussion to stay as impartial and multi-partisan as possible. With pleasure, I introduce to you Dean Schwartz.
Well, I certainly appreciate all the kind words that have been offered on my behalf. Don't believe everything that you hear. It is a pleasure to welcome you all here today, and I want to thank UNA and the other sponsoring organizations for putting this debate on, and I think we need to get right to it. So what I'm going to do is talk to you a little bit about the ground rules for the discussion, and then I'll introduce the speakers, and we'll begin. Let me start by introducing our debaters. On the pro-agreement side, Professor William Beeman, professor and chair of the Department of Anthropology at the University of Minnesota, recognized for expertise in Iranian culture and linguistics. He is author or editor of more than 100 scholarly articles, 500 opinion pieces, and 14 books, many of which relate to Iran. He has been a consultant to the Department of State, Defense, the United Nations, the European Union, on Middle Eastern affairs. He's also written extensively on music and performance traditions, both in Western and non-Western traditions. His latest book on this topic is Iranian Performance Traditions. Mr. Beeman, Professor Beeman, will be releasing a new book that centers on his experience as an opera performer in a leading German opera house. I'm reading that correctly.
That's right.
Well, that's very impressive. Our second speaker on the pro side will be Tom Hanson. Tom is a former U.S. Foreign Service officer with the Department of State. His diplomatic postings included East Germany, France, Norway, the Soviet Union, Sweden, and the former Soviet Republic of Georgia. He also worked on the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate and the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House, served as Director for NATO and European Affairs at the Atlantic Council. He holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Minnesota and graduate degrees from the Fletcher School of War and Diplomacy, the Institute of Advanced International Studies in Geneva, Switzerland, and the National School of Administration in Paris. He currently is the diplomat in residence at the Allworth Institute for International Affairs at the University of Minnesota in Duluth. On the con side, on the opposing side, we will hear first from Professor Oren Gross, the Irving Younger Professor of Law and Director of the Institute for International Legal and Security Studies at the University of Minnesota Law School. He is a globally recognized expert in the areas of international law and national security law. He holds an LLB degree, magna cum laude, from Tel Aviv University, and an LLM and SJD degrees from Harvard Law School. His book, Law in Times of Crisis, Emergency Powers in Theory and Practice, was awarded the Certificate of Merit for a Preeminent Contribution to Creative Scholarship by the American Society of International Law, and his most recent book, Guantanamo and Beyond, Exceptional Courts and Military Commissions in Comparative Perspective, was published in 2013. And finally, Terry Flower, PhD, is Emeritus Professor of Mathematics and Physics at St. Catherine University, where he served as chair of the department and held the endowed chair of science. Professor Flower is an expert on astrophysics and the physics of climate change, and was the president of the Minnesota Association of Scholars from 2009 to 2012. He served on numerous boards, including the board of directors for the Minnesota Academy of Sciences. He was a Metropolitan Council member for District 16, was the treasurer of the American Cancer Society, the president of the Twin Cities Republican Association. He received his MS and PhD from the University of Wyoming, and was selected as a distinguished visiting professor of physics at the U.S. Air Force Academy. He was also inducted into the Aerospace Educators Hall of Fame. So those are our four panelists, and let me just tell you the ground rules for the discussion. We will invite each panelist to speak for 8 minutes. I will give them a 1-minute warning that was just created shortly, some minutes before we began. So we will first listen to the first pro, then a con, then a pro, and then a con. And then each speaker will have 3 minutes for rebuttal, and then we'll open it up for questions for the audience. I'm going to ask that the first question be addressed to the pro side. The pro side will be given 3 minutes to respond to the question, and then the con side will choose their respondent. Could be both, but they will have a total of 3 minutes to respond, and that's how we'll do the questions and answers in that sort of structured conversation, if you will. So I'm going to move myself over here, and then I'm going to ask Professor Beeman to begin in just probably about 10 seconds, as soon as I can get my stopwatch out and get it going. So for the proposition that the agreement should be approved or should not be opposed by the Congress, Professor Beeman.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks to Keith Ellison for having provided us with such an excellent summary of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. That's how I'm going to refer to it during the course of this time. And I want to address the actual position of those who reject the JCPOA. Some simply reject the agreement out of hand. Some had rejected it even before the text was made public. And some oppose the agreement because they want to punish Iran and they want to humiliate President Obama. That's very clear. Others have announced that they will reject it, but they have no alternative. Now, when pressed, however, a few members of Congress who do oppose this bill have said that they are rejecting it because they believe that the United States, by rejecting the JCPOA, can forge a better deal with Iran. And that's what I want to address in my comments today. This position, in my view, is magical thinking. It assumes that there is an actual mechanism for renegotiation and that there's a whole raft of procedures that may be open to force Iran into additional concessions. In fact, however, these additional concessions desired by the opposition are, in my view, ignoring of facts, impossible, irrelevant, or irrational. And I'll go through these for you. Representative Ellison has given us the outline of the JCPOA, and I'm afraid that many people who oppose the bill have not actually read it. They don't know the facts about what is actually being demanded of Iran or what the United States' role is. But I'm going to skip those facts because they've already been presented. What's important for us to start with is the fact that there is no evidence anywhere by any intelligence agency anywhere that Iran had, has, or will have a nuclear weapons program. Iran definitely has a nuclear energy program, but nuclear weapons program has not been demonstrated with any evidence any place on the planet. Second of all, Iran's nuclear sites are already subject to 24/7 inspections under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Act, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and I'll refer to that as the NPT in my remarks here. The NPT was first initiated in 1968. It has 190 signatories, but not Israel, not Pakistan, not India, not North Korea. The JCPOA adds the additional protocol to the NPT, which allows for the inspection of non-nuclear sites, suspect sites. This additional protocol is a matter of international law, and it is the same for more than 100 NPT non-nuclear weapons signatories who have already signed on to the additional protocol. Under the NPT, Iran and the other non-nuclear weapon states have the inalienable right to peaceful nuclear development. Uranium enrichment is not evidence of a nuclear weapons program. 19 other non-nuclear weapons nations enrich uranium to a far greater extent than Iran has without ever being censured. And some of them have actually declared, or did in the past, have an actual nuclear weapons program. Even if Iran had enough highly enriched uranium to make a bomb, it would take about 2 years to actually manufacture the bomb and a delivery system, an activity that could not go undetected by the 24/7 IAEA inspection team. Oftentimes we talk about Iran being a month away from making a bomb. It's not a month away from making a bomb. It might be a month away from having enough enriched uranium to make a bomb. They still have to make the bomb. The JCPOA initiates the most rigorous inspections regime in the history of non-proliferation. Furthermore, 32 top American scientists, more than 100 American ambassadors, 60 national security experts, the Gulf Cooperation Council, that is the nations of the Persian Gulf, and 67 former Israeli intelligence and military officials all support the JCPOA in public documents, as well as the majority of the American Jewish electorate and the majority of Iranians, including Iranian Jews. Impossible concessions. One concession that legislators think they can achieve is to force Iran to completely dismantle its nuclear development program. This is an impossibility. Iran will not give up its 40-year, multi-billion-dollar nuclear technology program, a program that was originally instigated by the United States, nor can it be forced to do so under the NPT. Others opposing the bill think that they can force Iran to have a no-warning, anywhere, anytime inspections of any and all sites in Iran, of which anyone is suspicious, including military bases, research laboratories, college offices, and they have fixated on the idea that it could take 24 days for inspections under the JCPOA to take place, allowing Iran to cheat. All nuclear sites are already under the anywhere, anytime, immediate inspection under the NPT. If there's fissile material, they are under inspection right now, anywhere, anytime, immediately. For the non-nuclear sites, such as the Parchin military facility, the 24-day period is established by the additional protocol to the NPT treaty law, and 24 days is only an upper limit. The Iranian government must grant access to non-nuclear sites on application by the IAEA within a short period. If there's a dispute, the request goes into arbitration. The 24-day period is only the maximum time that could be expended before access is granted. And even if the full 24-day period elapses, Iran would not be able to clean up a suspect site sufficiently to escape detection of its activities. And that's Secretary of Energy Moniz and many, many others have completely have stated this many times. Members of the U.S. Congress opposed to the agreement also believe that somehow they can get the other P5+1 nations, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Russia, and China, as well as Iran, to return to the negotiation table to forge a new agreement. After 2 years of hard negotiation, The other P5+1 nations are satisfied with the agreement. They see no reason to return to negotiations or to sustain the economic sanctions against Iran. Germany, France, and Great Britain have already sent trade missions to Iran, so have Italy and Japan. Switzerland has removed all economic sanctions against Iran. India and Turkey will also resume trade. The United Nations Security Council will soon lift the United Nations sanctions. Oppositionists also believe that they can prevent Iran from receiving its own sequestered money. This money was embargoed for the duration of the sanctions. When the sanctions are lifted, Iran gets access to its own funds once more. This is written into the sanctions agreement itself. It cannot be undone. Irrelevant demands. Some members of Congress believe they can negotiate a Christmas tree fashion in talking about the development, requiring Iran to release political prisoners, to improve human rights record, to cease support for Syria, to stop funding Hezbollah and Hamas, and to recognize the State of Israel. These goals may be desirable, but none is in any way relevant to the JCPOA and was not negotiated by the P5+1. Finally, we have irrational issues, and the most important irrational issue is the threat to the United States and to Israel. I will say something and I'll elaborate later. The state of Iran, as a matter of public policy, has never threatened the state of Israel. No official statement to that effect. And the idea that Iran could attack the United States is equally irrational. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Beeman. By the way, we had discussion about, applause after statements, which I think is okay. Just no irrational expressions of exuberance during the comments. So there you go. So now the floor is Professor Gruss.
Speak standing
All right, I won't even start.
I cannot speak sitting down. So I want to thank the UN Association of Minnesota for organizing this important discussion and Dean Schwartz for moderating. I think it's safe to say that all of the opponents of the deal and most of the supporters of the Iran nuclear deal believe that a nuclear Iran is a threat to America's allies, to stability of the Middle East, and to America's national security interests. And the question is how best to prevent an Iranian bomb. When contemplating the question, we need to keep in mind Iran's track record of deception, its support for terrorism, and genocidal statements. And I have to say that, at least listening to Professor Beeman, I would say that to say that Iran did not make those statements and that Iran, and there's no indication of a nuclear program, is engaging in some sort of a magical thinking, and I'll elaborate on that. Let me touch on some of the most troubling aspects of the JCPOA. Infrastructure, inspections, sanctions, and threshold. Infrastructure. Under the agreement, and my field is international law, I read agreements very carefully, Iran is not required to dismantle any of its facilities, any of its nuclear or non-nuclear facilities, and all centrifuges remain. Not even one of the tens of thousands are supposed to be destroyed. The nuclear sites include the Fordo site, which is an underground enrichment facility buried inside a mountain, I'm sure only for peaceful purposes. The plutonium reactor in Iraq, which Senator Menendez tells us that Secretary Kerry at a meeting of senators said, and I quote, "They will either dismantle it or we will destroy it." And in Natanz, half of Iran's currently operating centrifuges will continue to spin there. What the agreement says is that the remainder will merely be disconnected and transferred to another hole, not destroyed. And so the same way that they are moved from hole A to hole B, they can then be removed back from hole B to hole A and could be quickly reinstalled to enrich uranium. I'll talk about Parchin in a minute. That's infrastructure. Inspections. We already heard something about the 24-day advance warning that Iran will get. Yes, it can be a maximum, but something deep inside tells me that that maximum is going to be reached each and every time, and it will be reached each and every time because Iran has the capacity, basically, by rejecting or by objecting to get to that maximum. We have been told for months by the administration that we will have an anywhere, anytime inspections. That's not what we have. Instead, we have basically a 24-day. And yes, even those who say that nuclear materials could be detected after 3 weeks or so should agree that at least as far as programs dealing with specialized high explosives, 24 days would give quite a lot of time to erase any detection of those. Iran will use also, as we learned last week, Iran will use its own inspectors in Parchin. Parchin is that nuclear weapons program site, or suspected nuclear weapons site, and under a secret side agreement with the IAEA, Iran will use its own inspectors. The IAEA inspectors cannot physically go into that site. Oli Hayanan, who headed the Iran probe as Deputy IAEA Director General from 2005 to 2010, said that he could think of, and I quote, no similar concession with any other country. This is important because this is at the heart of what is known as the PMD, or the possible military dimensions. There's a need to access or to know whether Iran has truly come clean about its past nuclear activities. And this is critical because as part of this Iran nuclear agreement that we are talking about, the IAEA must report by December on Iran's work developing nuclear triggers and designing warheads. So if you want to think about it, think of a situation in which Lance Armstrong says, I want to go back to compete in the Tour de France. I have two conditions. One is you'll give me 24 days before you do any drug tests on me. And number two, you're not going to walk into the room when I give you the urine sample. I'll give it to you. Number one, I think we will say, you are in no position to give us conditions. And number two, based on your track record, I don't think we will agree to either of those conditions. Infrastructures, inspections. Sanctions. Problems both with existing and with future sanctions. Let me start with existing. Under the agreement, sanctions relief is nearly immediate rather than phased out. It's not dependent on continued compliance, not phased out, not rolled back. And as we heard the British Foreign Minister today, he expects that all sanctions will be removed by 2016. A couple of issues with that. Number one, Iran will get, according to conservative estimates, $50 billion, according to less conservative estimates, $150 billion in frozen assets and in new contracts. This is a country that, under the yoke of sanctions, was the largest state sponsor of terrorism in places like Gaza, in places like Lebanon, in places like Yemen, and in places like Syria. You don't need to be an Israel friend to think about the tens of and hundreds of thousands of lives lost in Syria as a result of Iran upholding the Bashar al-Assad regime. If that's what they're doing with sanctions, we can only assume what they're going to do when more than 20% of the GDP is going to flow into their country. In addition, 5 and 8 years into the agreement, and we heard about this, the arms embargo and the ballistic missile ban is going to be removed. That should give you a pause. During the agreement, research and development on and manufacturing of advanced centrifuges will recommence during the life of the agreement. All of these are problematic as far as existing sanctions. We heard also about the snapback, right? If Iran violates, there will be snapback of sanctions. It's unrealistic for a number of reasons. Number one, the mechanism set in the agreement is highly cumbersome. Number two, Iran will be in a much stronger economic and financial position to withstand future sanctions once existing sanctions had been lifted. Number three, sanctions snapback will only happen under the agreement when significant non-performance happens. What if there's less than significant non-performance? If I were an Iranian legal advisor, I would say, well, just infringe, small points every time. 4, we already heard the Europeans are rushing to Tehran. So the likelihood that the Europeans will agree to reimposition of sanctions is very small. 5, under the agreement, there's a grandfather clause for agreement that are already signed before sanctions are reintroduced. They will not be scratched. And number 6, according to Iran's own statement, any reimposition or reintroduction of sanctions will be deemed by Iran as relieving it from its commitments under the agreement. Final point. nuclear threshold. The agreement is not a permanent agreement. It's an agreement for 15 years. And as a New York Times article of today notes, after 15 years, I quote, Iran is free to produce uranium on an industrial scale. The breakout time to the bomb, once the agreement is terminated, is, according to President Obama, in an interview in April, shrinks down almost to zero. And in fact, we don't need to wait 15 years, but 10 years, because after 10 years, Iran, under the agreement, starts getting more centrifuges into operation and is allowed to engage in R&D for significantly more advanced centrifuges. So the question, and with this I'll finish, as Senator Menendez said, we have abandoned with this agreement a long-hold policy of preventing nuclear proliferation, and what we have now is embarkment on management or containing, and that is something that should worry all of us. Thank you very much.
Okay, now for the pro side, our second speaker is Tom Hanson.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks to the UN Association for organizing this event. Thanks, Congressman Ellison, for being with us today. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, as we're calling it, the JCPOA, the Iran deal, is a major development in foreign policy. And it's happening in a time of rapid change in global politics, as well as in the Middle East. As the group of 100 former ambassadors and diplomats that was mentioned earlier said in their statement supporting the deal, it's far from perfect. It's not risk-free, but it's better than the conceivable opportunities. The international community has unified China, Russia, Germany, the UK, France, the US, in limiting the Iran program. Yes, the limits are for 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, as Professor Gross has described. In essence, it buys time. Now, three questions arise from this agreement right away. Can it be adequately monitored to assure a warning time if Iran tries to break out? The goal is to have 1 year of warning, and we'll have to be very careful on the verification regime. Second, will the US and the world community respond forcefully to protect our allies in the region if Iran does seek to break out? If Iran cheats, we will have the moral high ground in a way we will not have if we refuse the agreement now. The US is going to have to be very vigilant in this regard, and I think the signs are that we will be. The third question is, could this agreement conceivably lead to change in Iran, to a revolution of rising expectations? What could such a change look like? And is the 10 to 15-year framework enough time for meaningful change? Now, the administration is arguing for this agreement in terms of the first 2 points about the nuclear aspects and verification. But I would argue that in Washington's thinking, the third point is very important, the larger context of Iran. It was in 1979 that the world changed for both the Middle East and globally. The Iranian Revolution ended a period in which Israel had close relations with the large non-Arab countries of the region, with Turkey, with Iran, under David Ben-Gurion's periphery policy of keeping good relations. 1979 changed that. And in 1978, China opened to the world. And 37 years later, we're witnessing the rise of a potential peer competitor to the US, a major new displacement of power, both economic and political. Now this has changed the calculation. In a Mideast context, Iran looms as a threat to its smaller neighbors. Ironically, the US invasion of Iraq helped to create this situation by removing the counterweight to Iran, removing a strong Iraqi state. For 500 years, the smaller states of the region, the Arab states, were under the Turks. They do not want to fall under the Indo-European Persians now. You can understand their concerns. And yet, in a Eurasian context, Iran looms as an opportunity and a key factor in the energy and geopolitical trends and relations among the US, China, Russia, and India. The US to pivot to Asia signals that the US has awakened to this fact. It was a poorly chosen term. When you pivot, you're pivoting away from something. And our friends in the Middle East and in Europe immediately reacted. We changed the term to rebalancing, but it's too late. You know how branding is. It took hold. In the words of a Russian analyst recently, Iran is a geostrategic pivot. The entire geopolitical situation in Eurasia will change on the basis of Iran's political orbit. And already now, Russia and China are approaching Iran. China's Silk Road project across Eurasia has implications for Iran. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, in which Russia, China, and the Central Asian powers are together, will bring Iran in soon. Pipeline issues from the Caspian Sea and from Central Asia all involve Iran. Zbigniew Brzezinski has said, and by the way, he's old now, but his views are not without some weight in this Democratic administration, has said repeatedly that the only great threat to the U.S. position geopolitically today is a China, Russia, Iran entente. That has been his constant position. Now, very significantly, Russia and China have supported this agreement. It's part of what makes it something important. They agree that we do not want to see a radical Iran spreading Islamic fundamentalism around the world. Russia worries about Chechnya and its Muslim population. China worries about Xinjiang. Both see Iran as an ally in against what they consider the greatest enemy, ISIS, Sunni extremism. Both countries have concluded that Iran is the lesser evil. They also do not want to see nuclear proliferation in the Middle East, which is why they have backed us, why this is a global agreement with Iran. It's not just the U.S. But they will quickly expand their influence with Iran now. They'll quickly exploit this opening. We're already seeing signs of it.
Thank you, Congressman Ellison, Dean Schwartz, and distinguished panel, and all of you that are here this evening. Thank you for coming. I think that this is, especially to me, it's really kind of heartwarming, because I figure that you came here to learn more, that you didn't come in here with your minds made up and said, this is what it is. Because if your mind is already made up, then why bother to come? You probably couldn't be persuaded to change your mind. There's a number of ideas I'd like to just mention. But I want to just mention, too, that I was reminded when I used to live in the state of Wyoming. I was driving down the road with a neighbor of mine, and I said, who lives in that house over there? And he said, just an old woman and her son. And we went driving down a little bit further, and then he said something like, her son is 88. And I said, well, has she lived there all her life? He said, not yet. Yeah. So, folks, there's a couple things, a couple reasons why I think we need to worry about the deal, the Iran nuclear deal, and part of it has to do with the much lately discussed supposedly side deal. The Associated Press has reported with the draft agreement between the IAEA and Iran, and that basically the Iranians will not necessarily grant access to every particular point, and especially Parchin, and that they'll use their inspectors to provide evidence of what's going on, and I think, like one of our colleagues had mentioned, in a way it's not just like being a bicycle rider and making some conditions that you want to make, but it's more like the fox guarding the henhouse. It doesn't make sense. I mean, to me, I think the thing that we really want to be talking about is that there should be 5 major points. One of these points should be that there should be inspections and verifications. Folks, more than anything, I don't think anybody in here wants to see Iran get a nuclear weapon. I think this is a point where we can make a decision that we are going to stand our ground and say, no, you're not going to get a nuclear weapon. Not today, not in 5 years, not in 10 years, not in 15 years. I think we have to also look at the military dimensions. We want to take just a brief exploration of sanctions and talk about the duration and then any efforts at dismantling. One of the things, being a physicist, I'm interested in the science and nuclear weapons. And I will tell you, folks, I'm very pro-nuclear energy. I think it's really kind of clean, that technically we can handle the nuclear waste. And I agree that Iran and everybody else, I'd like to see us do a little bit more with the development of peaceful nuclear power. But nuclear weapons, I think, are another story. I spent a little time in the military. I have a lot of friends who were, let's say they were guests of the Hanoi Hilton for 6 and 7 years. But I personally, some of my classmates became 3-star, 4-star generals. They put their pants on one leg at a time, just like you and I do. They have the same interest. They're not interested in war, except and only in the case to protect America and protect the human life. Back in 1967, we found out something about making nuclear weapons. At the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, they got a grant to hire some physicists. In other words, they had some certainly capability in understanding the science behind nuclear physics, but they weren't specialists in any way. They call it the nth nation. We were the first nation to develop nuclear weapons. Russia was the second. Who's going to be the nth nation? And they found out that really with some amateur physicists, the plan was down, and they were able to move forward towards what would necessarily need to be done to make a nuclear weapon. But I'll also mention that it's not so easy. The ideas are simple and straightforward, but to make it happen, it takes a lot of engineering, and it's difficult. And I do agree that there are some time limits to be able to move forward and be able to claim that you have a nuclear weapon. And then secondly, we need to be able to deliver that particular nuclear weapon somewhere. If you're enriching 235, you're probably talking about 33 pounds. If you're enriching plutonium 239, you're probably talking about 8 pounds. Some people say as little as 4 pounds. So the amount is doable, but to make the explosion, to make a bomb work, in the case of plutonium, for example, you need an implosion device. So it's not so easy because it all has to happen within a matter of a fraction of a second to explode. Now we have some wild ideas about what Iran might do if it did get it. Some people have said, well, they're probably going to just load up a missile or an airplane and get it going towards Israel right away. I want you to know that I'm a Christian member of AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. I do believe a strong Israel is important to stability in the Middle East. I think if this deal moves forward as it has been negotiated, I think we'll see a more unstable situation. I can remember when President Carter said, "Oh, Iran is an island of stability in a sea of chaos." And of course, today we see that it's really something else, but it's still a sea of turmoil. I I'll be happy to answer all of your questions. Thank you for coming this evening.
Now, if the panelists care to, I'll invite each one in the same sequence to offer no more than 3 minutes of rebuttal comments based on the presentations that have already been made. So let me start with Professor Beeman.
Thank you very much. I want to make these points very quickly and clearly. First of all, we talk often about the track record of deception for Iran. This is not true. Iran's nuclear program has been in existence for more than 40 years. The United States has known about it all the time. In fact, we started it. In 1998, nuclear scientists were invited to Iran. They were prevented by the CIA from going there to actually inspect the program. The idea that Iran was making nuclear weapons started in 2003. And it was at the same time that we were invading Iraq. It was never, it was discussed before, but always there was some idea about Iran was 6 months, 12 months, 2 years away from making a nuclear weapon. That started in 1990 with Robert Gates. Until now, we haven't had it. Iran is not required to dismantle its centrifuges because it is their right to have them under the NPT. Iran may enrich uranium just like 19 other nations without any other permission needed. Now, it might have been possible to get Iran to get rid of their centrifuges, but they didn't have to do it, and they don't want to do it, and they consider it a major engineering project, and it's a matter of national pride. The 24-day period was not part of the JCPOA per se as a negotiating point. That is a condition of the additional protocol to the NPT, which was negotiated in the framework in Lausanne. Iran agreed to get the NPT. They are implementing the additional protocol exactly as 100 other nations are implementing the additional protocol. This is not something special for Iran. This is international law. I wanted to, though, especially to talk about this AP report about Iran having its own inspectors. This is absolutely inaccurate and completely wrong. This has been the idea that Iran is going to be independently providing its own material to the IAEA has been already refuted by at least a dozen IAEA inspectors, former inspectors, and including the IAEA director, Amano. Tariq Rauf, who was the head of Verification and Security Policy Coordination Office in IAEA, under 3 directors from 2002 to 2011, has declared that the document that was presented by the AP is probably a forgery, probably false. And so this is a very, very problematic charge, and it simply is not true. Iranian inspectors would be allowed to collect this material, but under the supervision of IAEA inspectors who would always be with them all the time. Iran wanted to have this because they were concerned that the IAEA inspectors would try to plant material that would make it difficult. I want just one more thing, if you don't mind my saying so. Don't believe anything you read that is written by David Sanger or Michael Gordon in the New York Times. That was what they said today, and especially their favorite people to quote, namely Oli Hanonen and David Albright, who have made their living out of attacking Iran. They are the go-to people for David Sanger and Michael Gordon, and they always present material that is incorrect.
I have to cut you off now.
Thank you very much.
Good. Just so you all understand my strategy, I announce when the time has elapsed, and at I won't say how many seconds, but at a certain amount of seconds behind that, then I will just cut the person off, unmercifully. Okay, Oren.
So I want to move to some additional points, but I'll just go back to this last point that Professor Beeman made as to the part of the problem that we have in this debate is the flattening of the debate. That is, those who oppose, and let me be clear on this, I believe that reasonable people can be on both sides. And there can be a rational debate, not irrational, rational debate about the merits of this agreement, including by people who read the agreement. Part of the problem is that there is a flattening of the debate. There's a flattening of the debate
in the sense that if you're opposed, you're frequently castigated as a warmonger, as well as if you are in favor, you're frequently castigated as somebody who doesn't care or doesn't understand U.S. national security needs. Both sides on this are wrong. And to me, yes, you should not believe anything you read in the papers or in the internet, but that's true on both sides, both for those who might write against Iran and for those who might write in favor of Iran, right? You should have a healthy skepticism to anything you read. We heard several times about the options or the alternatives, and I just want to quickly just go to that. First thing is, let's remember that we heard for many, many, many months, starting from the President's Secretary, Kerry, Secretary of Defense, Wendy Sherman, the chief negotiator, we heard this mantra of no deal is better than a bad deal. Now, if you believe that this is a bad deal, there is a question of, is no deal better? Now, I don't actually happen to believe that a no deal would have been better than this deal. But what I do believe is that there are things that can be significantly strengthened about this deal. We talked already about the inspections. I think there is a more robust way to deal with those inspections. We talked about the sanctions. I believe that there are other things that could have been done then. I think that the United States played, to talk about, the poker game that was going on, I think that the United States underplayed its hand. And I still believe that there are things that can be done today and that Congress can actually, the numbers are probably not there, but Congress could have maybe done and forced the hand of the executive. Let me maybe stop there because I saw Eric raising the thing.
You've got 20 more seconds.
Okay, so about statements, that's also, I just want to say one thing that kind of frequently comes up in the media. I don't think that this is an Israeli issue. I don't think this is a Jewish issue. I don't think that should have been a partisan issue. I think it's an American issue. It's Iran that speaks about, let's also remember, Big Satan is not Israel.
Time.
Big Satan is the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Oren. Tom.
Thank you. We should keep in mind this is a global agreement. This is not just a U.S. agreement with Iran. The whole idea of this diplomacy, as I understand it, was to get a strong sanctions regime. In previous years, the Europeans were not going along with sanctions, and they were tremendously ineffective. In the last few years, they have been, and it's part of what I think brought Iran to the table. And to revisit this agreement, I fear, would lead to a sense of isolation for the United States. And by the way, we're kind of on a roll that way. The way our Congress played around with defaulting on our debt has had serious repercussions in our standing in the global economy. The way we opposed the China Infrastructure Bank and were left high and dry because it was blocked in our Congress. The idea of expanding the IMF to include more Chinese and Indian votes was blocked in our Congress, and the rest of the world simply went on in their own direction. I fear that's what's going to happen in this case if we reject this deal. The best can be the enemy of the good. So then the question arises, how exposed is Israel? How immediate would the threat be to Israel if this deal goes through? And I have to believe that with possibly 150, maybe more nuclear weapons, I have to believe that Israel, at least now, has a deterrent, a strong deterrent against Iran. There was an important moment during the Iran-Iraq War when 100,000 Iranian soldiers were killed by Saddam Hussein by nerve gas, chemical weapons. Iran did not go for a chemical weapons capacity and use the same argument they're using now, that it is that this is something that is not in line with Islam, as they were saying. Now, you can doubt that. Chances are countries that want to get nuclear weapons badly will find a way to do it. But I just think that we have time here. We've bought time with this agreement. We have time to give it a roll before immediate, stark security threats arise. And as I say, we have to be hopeful that we'll be vigilant. We'll have the international community behind us in a way we won't have if we reject this deal, if the time comes when we have to react.
Thank you, Tom. Dr. Flower.
Thank you. You know, sometimes when you buy a car, especially if you buy a used car, you have a waiting period during which you can return that car. Maybe it's 24 hours or 3 days. It's not everywhere, but in some places you do. And most people are very reluctant to do it, but they might just go ahead and do it. The one thing, if you don't do it in that 3 days, or whatever that time period might be, and whether it's a car or anything else, I know there's a 30-day period on hearing aids, for example. You know, but the thing is, if you don't return it in that period, then you're stuck with what you've got. And in some ways, I look at this deal that this is our one shot. That if we say no right now, then maybe we can do something about it. We say yes, we have the deal like it is. We're seeing already almost rabid some other countries. We see Germany, France, you know, have already sent their envoys over to make economic deals. You know, hopefully to stimulate their own economies, because Iran will have money to be able to do this. One thing you need to keep in mind is that the sanctions have worked. There's no doubt about it. Now, I'm really concerned is that let's say there's a 24-day or whatever period to have some inspections approved, whether they are or not. If when we find out there's something gone wrong with Iran, what do we do? And it's not just a nuclear deal. If Iran is continuing to be a bully in the Middle East, to go ahead and promote terrorism, it's the leading promoter of terrorism in the Middle East right now. Thank you. And we need to be able to do something about it. And how, you know, reinstituting those sanctions, I tell you, really would be tough. It really would be tough. I don't know how that could happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move to the next, thank you very much. We're going to move to the next portion. I'm going to stand up here, and let me just explain what, this is questions and comments from the audience, and let me just set a couple of quick ground rules, and then we'll get going. First, please, no question should go longer than 1 minute. If it does, I will cut you off. So you can use your minute or up to your minute as you wish. But at events like this, oftentimes people have views they want to express. I'm not going to prevent you from doing that. But if it prevents you from asking a question within a minute, then we'll go on to the next comment. But this is really for questions. The second comment is that we will you will direct your question. The first question will be to a member of the pro side, and you should direct it either to Professor Beeman or Tom Hanson, and then the next question will be to the con side. The pro side will have 3 minutes to respond, and then the con side will determine which, between the two of them, they will determine which of the two are going to answer the question or respond. They can both respond. If one of them responds, they have 3 minutes. If both of them respond, they have 1.5 minutes. Very simple, the rules, and then we'll just go back and forth. Okay? Does everyone understand that? Very good. Okay, so let me get my phone ready. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, question for the pro side. Yes, who is your question for?
My question might be a comment, not a question. The thing is that I don't think any country in this world should have nuclear weapons to begin with. And the thing is that, as Beeman said, and Tom Hanson reiterated, Israel has never signed a non-proliferation treaty, and they have, I think, at least 200 nuclear weapons, possibly more.
I'm going to amend, I'm going to interrupt you with, I'm going to have to amend what I'm going to say. I can't prevent people from making comments, but you must have a question. You must have a question, okay? Yeah, you must have a question. I'm trying to be as liberal as I can. I beg your pardon? Do you have a question?
I said, what do you think of that?
Defeated. Defeated. Okay. Let me ask.
I want to reiterate that 67 former intelligence and military officials in Israel have endorsed the JCPOA. And the idea that, 4 former directors of Mossad have said that Iran is not an existential threat to Israel because they know that they could retaliate. And the Iranians know too that if they don't have a bomb, if they had one bomb and they sent it to Tel Aviv, then they would be annihilated. And so Israel has a very, very strong deterrent against Iran today and in the future. Moreover, the Iranian leadership has denounced the use of nuclear weapons innumerable times as being un-Islamic. As we had heard before, they didn't use chemical weapons during the Iran-Iraq War. However, Saddam Hussein did, and this chemical weapons, the intelligence for the chemical weapons, were supplied by the United States. So let's, we have to be, I think, a little careful when we hear Prime Minister Netanyahu about all of the disagreement within his own government, his former officials, with his very, very extreme view of what ratifying this the JCPOA would mean for Israel in the future.
Thank you. Now, either Professor Gross or Dr. Flower, do you want to comment?
I'm happy to. Go ahead. So a couple of things. First of all, let me start with they know they can retaliate. And let me actually I'll preface this. The issue here is not Israel, the issue here is Iran. I'm happy to talk about Israel, but the issue here is Iran. And to equate, again, a regime that has, under the previous president, made numerous genocidal statements upheld by the supreme leader and not rebuffed by the supreme leader is not the same as talking about any democratic society, whether it is one of the P5 or others. With respect to know they can retaliate, let's also understand what we're talking about here. We're talking about, if we're talking about Israel, we're talking about a country that is 1/11 the size of Minnesota, that is highly concentrated. So yes, even if Israel has the capacity, and I'm glad to see that we have here intelligence officers that can tell me how many nuclear warheads Israel has, even if Israel can retaliate, it will be a second strike. By the time that second strike comes, there won't be anything left of that country. Understand the sizes we are talking about here. If you're happy to sit with that, I remind you what happened here with the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is far, far worse as far as Israel is concerned. As far as the 67 and the 4 Mossad former heads, there is a wall-to-wall agreement, left, center, and right in Israel against this agreement. The military intelligence said, same with the Mossad, same with the previous 67, there are positive sides to this agreement. I started by saying there are positive sides to this agreement. Not everything is bad. Unlike some of those on both the pro and the con side, I actually am trying to be a bit more nuanced, not to say rational. There are positive sides, but the overall tenor of this agreement is negative.
Okay, a question for Professor Gross or Dr. Flower. Let me see. Yes.
Hi, thank you for being here. I have a question. I listened to you guys talk about the cons for this, but I didn't quite hear an alternative, except from what my understanding is, the United States didn't really play their hand strong enough. So I'm wondering, like, what would be the alternative? And then also, I'm curious where folks on this panel stood on the Iraq War. And from my argument, from what it sounds like, that people, the argument is about human life. Am I correct in that? that this is about protecting human life. And I guess the cost-benefit analysis of which human life, like sanctions, impact human lives, innocent people. What about our military men and women? If they go off to another war, what about their human life? So I guess the cost-benefit analysis of human life and which human life we value.
Okay, this is for either Professor Gross or Dr. Flower, or both.
When we look at alternatives, yes, it would be nice if we never had to send a young man or young woman off to defend this country. But the simple fact is that we have. I think it was back in the days of John Locke had said something, that war is ugly, but it's not the ugliest things. Far more uglier than war is a state of a human condition that becomes so decrepit that it stands back and will let other men go stand in their place and fight for them and only for them. I think we do need to look at the conditions we have right now. I'm personally very concerned about what happens in the Middle East. I do not think that Israel will attack Iran preemptively, but I can guarantee you that there will be the second strike if one is carried out against them.
You still have another minute and a half,
Okay.
Oren, if you'd like to use it.
So a couple of things. First of all, the statement that war is hell was coined by a former general, not by a civilian. And it's people who have served in the military, who know how brutal war is. I served for 5 years. Anybody who served does not want to go there. I don't believe that war is the only alternative. I don't think that war was the only alternative in the past. I don't think that war is the only alternative now. Personally, by the way, I'm on record of this, I was opposed to the 2003 Iraq war. I thought then, and I said this before the war, that was a wrong thing to do. With respect to the alternative, I don't want to duck this issue. As I said, I think that the two issues that can still be nuanced and finessed is sanctions, right, and inspections. On both of these, there are still things that can be done.
Oh, okay. By the way, gentlemen, when I pick this up, that means you have 1 minute left, okay? That's the. So now you have 40 seconds if you'd like to use them.
You tell a law professor he still has the mic. Hey, I'm there. I'm game. So, as I said, I think that, and so one of the things that we hear about sanctions, right, there's a certain dual play here. On the one hand, we hear, well, the sanctions were effective, but, our European allies have fizzled away. The sanctions were unraveling. You can't have it both ways. You cannot say the sanctions were not working and therefore we need a disagreement. And by the way, if the Iranians will violate, we will have robust sanctions. You need to decide which way you want. I believe that the sanctions did work. I believe the sanctions can work. But you need to have a robust system of sanctions for them to work.
Thank you, Oren. Yeah. I'm going to give, on this question of alternatives, again, I'm going to give Tom Hanson the first opportunity if he'd like to take it. And then, if there's time, Bill Beeman.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to just, before talking about alternatives, just get to the Iraq War, because really a lot of what's happening right now is a result of our decision to invade Iraq, because we shattered a system that had existed really for 100 years since the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which created the modern boundaries of the Middle East. It was a European-engineered landscape, which was going to change someday, but we sped it up. And in probably what was one of the most blockheaded decisions in the history of U.S. foreign policy, we launched the de-Baathification campaign, in which we removed the Sunnis from all level, not just of government, but almost of society. And we're still paying the price for that. And what we face now is a radical Sunni movement, which is Sunni, ISIS, which is trying to accomplish what really Arab leaders have wanted since they became independent, and that is a greater Arab unity. The United Arab Republic was an expression of that when Syria and Egypt attempted to draw closer together. It's a tragedy that it's happening in a radical group like ISIS. Now, the problem is that for a lot of the world now, for India, and as I mentioned before, for Russia, for China, ISIS is a far bigger threat than Iran. They consider Iran a more rational actor than what's emerging right now in this space of the old Sykes-Picot. And quite frankly, we are de facto cooperating with Iran, even as we speak, in the fight against ISIS. So once again, I get back to the geopolitics of this. Even the regional politics have shifted to a great extent, and I think form part of the backdrop for the attempt through this agreement to bring Iran back in from the cold to some extent.
You've got another 50 seconds if you'd like to take him, Bill, or not.
Sure. Thanks very much. One of the things that I think we have to remember is that, as you had mentioned, Iran and the United States have a huge number of common interests in environmental protection, in interdiction of drugs, and more importantly, in the fighting with ISIS. The idea that the United States and Iran are not coordinating in the fight with ISIS is really a very, you'd have to be very gullible not to believe that. They're definitely coordinating their efforts. And so in a sense, Iran and the United States are already allies in this particular fight. So I find ISIS a really terrific danger. And when we talk about Iran being the chief sponsor of terrorism, what about the support from the Persian Gulf nations for ISIS? That has been huge. Most of their money has come from first of all, what they can steal, and second of all, from the Persian Gulf nations. Iran hasn't supported ISIS. Iran hasn't supported the Taliban. Iran hasn't supported Al-Qaeda. So if we come to Syria, we've got to remember that Iran has an internationally recognized mutual defense treaty with the elected government of Syria. Whatever you may think of them, they have a mutual defense treaty that they carry out.
I must cut you off now. Okay, now let me explain, because I know at the end there are people whose hands have been raised and they haven't been recognized. So I'm trying to move from one section to the next So now I'm going to look to that far section for a question, and I see a yes, with the sweater, exactly. Yes.
So you touched the pro side touched.
Let me just say, this should be a question for either Bill Beeman or Tom Hanson in the first instance. Oh, so you've got...
yeah. So,
the pro side.
Yes, for the pro side. So what I'm gathering from this discussion is that this is really kind of a way to sort of integrate Iran back into international relations, a kind of a foot in the door in that manner. And so I've also heard throughout the presentation or throughout the debate that there's a lot of stuff in the JCPOA that is already covered in the non-proliferation treaty. And so I'm wondering if you could differentiate what actually this new deal brings to the table. And yeah, that's...
Thank you.
The JCPOA, as Representative Ellison pointed out, involves Iran actually specifically reducing their stockpile of enriched uranium material and also silencing their centrifuges. Now, the centrifuges are not destroyed, they're not taken away, but look, folks, after 15 years, they're going to be obsolete. The centrifuges are going to be obsolete. They already were obsolete after 5 years when Iran first got their centrifuges. So anyway, Iran is reducing its stockpiles of uranium. It's reducing the centrifuges. It is also disabling its facility at Natanz, which would have allowed for the production of plutonium, which could have been another route to a bomb. So there's a great reduction in this, and this reduction in stockpiles and so forth, it lasts for 10 to 15 years, and some provisions last forever. In addition, the IAEA has tripled its inspection team. So the inspection team for the IAEA is going to be 3 times more intense than it is today. So all of these things are things that Iran has agreed to as a part of these accords, and these are not specific. Oh, and I'm sorry. And the acceptance of the additional protocol to the JCPOA is also, to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is also part of the JCPOA. Iran had observed the additional protocol for several years during the Bush administration, trying to get the United States to talk to it, and the United States would not. And so Iran abandoned the additional protocol. Now they're reinstating it.
Tom, there's 50 seconds left if you'd like to use them.
Yeah,
Okay.
Just very briefly on this idea of reintegrating Iran, really that depends on our understanding or our perception of the capacity for change within Iran today, whether there are forces in the population that might be amenable to the new situation. There's a woman at the Atlantic Council where I used to work named Barbara Slavin who goes often to Iran, and she's been talking and writing more about what's happening in the Revolutionary Guard, because just as in Mubarak's Egypt, these people have economic interests now, big time. And they may be a part of the establishment that will stand to profit once Iran begins to open. Well, my understanding is that they are one of the last remaining pillars of support for the current government. Now, I'm not naive enough to say this country is going to change overnight. Quite the contrary, we're likely to have a lot of sort of protestations to the contrary in the initial phase. But if you look deep, and maybe later in the conversation, I asked Bill Beeman what his perception is, because he was just recently there. Anyway, that's the issue. What is it like inside the society now as this takes hold?
Just one sentence. 2/3 of the population is under the age of 35. They have no knowledge of the revolution, no personal knowledge, no knowledge of Ayatollah Khomeini, and they want change.
Well, for that breach of protocol, we will give the other side an extra 30 seconds. So, Oren and Dr. Flara, you may come.
So I think that integrating Iran back to the Society of Nations is...
2/3 of the population is under the age of 35. They have no knowledge of the revolution, no personal knowledge, no knowledge of Ayatollah Khomeini, and they want change.
Well, for that breach of protocol, we will give the other side an extra 30 seconds. So, Oren and Dr. Flara, you may come.
So I think that integrating Iran back to the Society of Nations is extremely important. As Bill mentioned, Israel and Iran actually had a very strong relationship pre-79, and I can tell you I'll be delighted if that came back. However, we also need to understand, and I am sure, I have no doubt, that there is a strong group within Iran that wants change, certainly the young people. Unfortunately, part of the problem is that when the sanctions are lifted, and on that, again, this is documented, most of the money is going to flow to fund, some of them on the books, some of them are not on the books. Many of them are controlled by what is known as EICO, E-I-K-O, which is basically a slush fund, if you will. The Dean would love to have such a slush fund run by the Supreme Leader. The Supreme Leader is not interested in change. And in fact, we've seen what happened when there were attempts of change. These conservative groups, arch conservatives, radical Islamist groups are actually going to have an inflow of funds out of this agreement. What do we have here? We have, as we heard, we have an agreement that allows us to buy time at best, or as Senator Menendez, by the way, another opponent of the Iraq War, said, we are going to buy a very expensive alarm system. Now, there are positives and there are benefits of getting an alarm system, but again, understand what we're getting. In 10, 15 years, we are going to have Iran as a nuclear threshold state, legitimately, legally, right? As a nuclear threshold state with the capacities. Yes, capacities, and not necessarily acting upon, but if you look at track record counts for something.
Dr. Flara, you have another minute if you'd like to use it.
Thank you very much. In lots of ways, this looks like a get out of the Middle East free card. I think we're just jumping at an agreement. We see right now China has made a deal, $1 billion deal for advanced fighter jet airplanes. Now that's not a peaceful kind of activity. Russia has made a deal with Iran for some shorter range strategic missiles. I mean, these are not peaceful kinds of activities. I think we would like it very much if, in fact, Iran is going to moderate and we'll all be able to, you know, stand out naked in the sun and be happy. It's not going to happen.
You first.
Well, okay, now I'm going to look to the middle. I think there's a gentleman right in the back there in the middle. Yes, please.
This is for the con side?
Yes, it is for the con side.
One of the things I'd like to ask is a comment, first of all. You talked about how the sanctions worked, and they did work. And wasn't the purpose of the sanctions to get Iran to the table to negotiate an agreement? So that's the first point. The second point is that we buy time for 10 to 12 years. Do you not have enough faith in the concept of freedom and democracy to think that that inspiration might strike those people, the younger people in Iran who might change that government? We've used that kind of strategy against Russia. We're trying to use it against China. Why can't we use it against Iran?
I think that's exactly what we'd like to see happen. We'd like the young people to take the lead and have freedom across the world. But we can see from history, speaks with a single voice, that isn't going to happen.
We still have time, right?
You have plenty of time.
So faith, absolutely. And again, I'll get to the first question as well in my 2 minutes. Absolutely faith, and I'll be delighted if we see change in Iran. I just remind you again, we've seen it several years ago when there were attempts at changes, right, from coming bottom up, and we saw how the regime, right, treated those demands for change of the Iranian people. We cannot build foreign policy based on just faith. We need to have and trust. We need to have foreign policy that is supported by robust, strict instruments. And if those strict instruments will get us to the position where faith is there, where we can all be naked in the sun, fine. We are not there yet. With respect to the question of sanctions, yes, sanctions were supposed to bring us to the table, and sanctions did bring us to the table. But again, as I said, there is some sort of a dual play that is going on here. On the one hand, we hear from the administration that one of the reasons why this is the best deal, right, is because the sanctions are unraveling. The Europeans are running to Tehran. We cannot hold the sanctions. This is the best that we can get. And at the same time, the answer to why this agreement will be robust is that if Iran violates, we'll impose sanctions. Who exactly is going to impose those sanctions? If in fact the Europeans are already unraveling, right, then are we likely to see the Europeans, once they get those lucrative agreements with the Iranians, agreeing to reimpose sanctions? You cannot have it both ways. So either the sanctions are effective or they're not effective. I'm happy to think that they're effective, right? But then, if they are in fact effective, they need to be robustly, right, streamlined in the sense that, understand this, under this agreement, if Iran violates 3-4 years down the line, the money's already gone. All those assets that are frozen, they've already been unfrozen and in Iranian hands. You cannot say, oh, excuse me, let's change the rules, bring the money back, let us refreeze it, and let's talk. This is gone. Those $150 billion are going to be in Iranian hands. So I'm quite happy to have sanctions roll back, phased out sanctions, as compliance is continuous. And this is not what this agreement is doing.
Thank you. I think Bill and Tom have the floor.
I've just come back from Iran in June. I travel rather frequently to Iran. I've been doing so since 1968. One of the things I should tell you is that there's an unintended consequence of the sanctions, and that is that Iran has become self-sufficient in just about everything. Just about everything. And that's one of the reasons why the Europeans want to invest. They've been coming to Iran. I saw this myself. They come to Iran, they take a look at these very, very complete modern factories, these mining operations, the petrochemical facilities. And as one German gentleman said to me, he said, we don't need to spend a penny here. All we need to do is to expand the distribution of these products that are already here in Iran. Build a building with anything that's in Iran. I will predict something for you, and that is that when Ayatollah Khamenei dies, there will be no more supreme leader. The religious establishment in Iran is thoroughly and completely opposed to this, as is Ali al-Sistani, probably the most important Shia leader in the world in Najaf. They'll replace him with the supreme leader with a council or something, but there will not be a supreme leader after he dies. I will predict that.
Tommy, you still have a minute if you'd like to use it.
Yeah. The sanctions have worked. As I said, they've worked because, and I think it's partly because once other countries were convinced that they were in a framework of negotiating with Iran, they were willing to go along. The U.S. alone cannot impose sanctions that will really cut. Now, I mentioned before we're starting to isolate ourselves. The problem with this constant use of sanctions is it's stimulating other countries now to finally find ways to create new institutions to get around them. This is happening among Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. I mentioned some of the Chinese institutions that are coming up. It's an instrument that the more we use it, I'm afraid, the more, in a sense, we're pushing people prematurely to organize in other ways. If Iran breaks out, could you reimpose the sanctions? I think you would still have very powerful countries, and I'll include Russia and China in this, who are uneasy with an Iranian nuclear profile. And to the extent that the sanctions are lifted, countries engage in a competition for their influence. As I say, in Eurasia, everyone's going to be trying now to appeal to Iran. I personally believe that this is going to have an effect, that you're not going to have one little group of ayatollahs controlling all that money for their nefarious purposes. This is going to have a big impact on the entire society and politics.
Thanks, Tom. So let me explain where we are now. We have time. I'm going to look to this section for a final question. I'm going to ask that the question will be directed to the pro side, I believe, but I'm going to ask that we're going to cut the amount of time to answer to 2 minutes. Why am I doing that? So that after that answer, each panelist will have 1 minute to make a concluding remark, and then we will turn the floor back over to our friends at UNA. So is there somebody in this section who has a question? Whoa, that was very quick, so I will recognize you.
Can anyone imagine that if Iran had a nuclear weapon, it would use it? I want to ask the con side. Professor Gross, Professor Beeman has talked about inspections in terms of the IAEA agreement, providing that those inspectors would do the real inspection and the Iranians could go along so that the IAEA guys could not plant evidence. You haven't addressed any of that. Would you please?
I'll permit that question to go forward in this case. It should have been directed to the pro side, but we're short on time. We don't need to litigate the issue. Why don't the con side answer, and then I'll give the pro side the opportunity to respond. Please.
I think I addressed it very clearly when I spoke. I said that according to the side agreement, the secret side agreement that we know of between the IAEA and Iran, a side agreement that, as I said, is relevant to the IAEA work under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The agreement is that Iran will deploy its own inspectors in Parchin, which allegedly is where the Iranian nuclear weapons program was carried out, that Iran will deploy its own inspectors, and those inspectors will then hand over samples to the IAEA inspectors. I thought I was very clear on this. And if that's in fact what's in the side agreement, right, then this is something that we should be overly concerned about, because that basically means Iran is going to inspect itself with respect to a nuclear weapons program. If that is not troubling, I don't know what would be troubling.
There's 1 minute. Bill, 1 second. Let me just make sure. Dr. Flaherty, you want to say anything?
Okay, I think, part of that question was, do we think that Iran will use that nuclear weapon? I think if the religious right would probably be inclined to do so, I think the political, I think Khomeini is probably not as extreme and would probably not use it.
Okay, so now I'm going to give the pro side 2 minutes to respond to that question, and then we'll sum up.
Just to be historically clear, the agreement between the IAEA and Iran has nothing to do with the JCPOA, nothing at all. This was a matter of a long-standing negotiation between Iran and the IAEA, and it is not part of the JCPOA agreement in any way. And it's restricted to one facility, that is the Parchin facility, and not to any other. So it does not go forward talking about other possible facilities that are covered under the JCPOA. Furthermore, we had Olli Heinonen. I think he's factually challenged, saying that he never knew of any other agreement. Dozens of IAEA former inspectors say that this precedent is very, very well established. It was established with Brazil, it was established with Argentina. Moreover, it is a secret agreement between the IAEA and Iran, which is part of the IAEA protocol. And the United States has no possibility of interfering in that private secret agreement. That's entirely between the agency and the country in question. With regard to whether Iran would use a nuclear weapon, they would have to have quite a lot of them. Iran recently had enough high-enriched uranium to possibly make one bomb. It takes 2 years for them to actually make the bomb. Then they have to test it, and then they have no bombs. And the idea that they would somehow send one bomb to Tel Aviv makes no sense at all. But unless you just think that Iran are just a bunch of meanies, and they just want to kill people in Israel, this makes no sense. But nevertheless, it has been promulgated, and I had a fantastic quote from Joel Rosenberg, who called Iran an apocalyptic genocidal death cult. That wanted to bring about the end of the world, and therefore it was going to bomb Iran and bomb the United States. This was on Fox News yesterday.
Your time is up. Okay, thank you, Professor Beeman. So what we're going to do now, with thanks, I'm going to give much more effusive thanks in a minute, but with thanks to our panelists, we're going to invite our panelists in the same order that began the evening, with the pro side, in other words, in favor of the agreement. Speaking first, you've got just 1 minute. I apologize, but our time is short. 1 minute for summary comments. Then Oren, Professor Gross, then Tom Hanson, and then Dr. Flower. 1 minute each. Let me just get my... Dr. Beeman,
yep.
You may begin.
I wrote a piece which said that Iran had successfully completed the negotiations by agreeing not to do what it never intended to do and never did. And that we have no evidence at all that Iran ever had a nuclear program, but we do know that during the Bush administration cooked up this idea that Iran was building a bomb because they explicitly stated that they wanted to effect regime change in Iran, just like they did in Iraq. And so we've been chasing around after a non-existent nuclear program, imposing sanctions on Iran. And I'll tell you that the Iranians have played this very well themselves, because they have, by increasing their activity, they were able to leverage an agreement with the United States. But we've been going at this for 15 years, and it has been a rather empty exercise, and I think absolutely no existential threat to Israel, to the United States, or to the rest of the world. And integrating Iran with the rest of the world is going to be a huge event. It's going to be as important as the opening to China.
I have to cut you off.
Okay.
Okay. Professor Gross, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Faith is important and change is important. Alas, you do not establish foreign policy just on faith and change. We did not do this with respect to the former Soviet Union. One of the reasons the wall came down was not because just faith in change, but rather because of robust policy by the United States. This agreement, which I would love to believe in, is just not robust enough. I have to tell you, I said this is not about Israel and it's not about Jewish communities, it's not about partisanship, it's about American interests. But let me speak for just a second as an Israeli coming from a country that, as I said, is 1/11 the size of Iran. When I hear Professor Beeman speak about German engineers building in Iran, that doesn't exactly make my heart sing. And when we are talking about
the French too and the Italians. Okay.
I didn't interrupt you. And when I hear about German engineers building in Iran, a country where has a long track record of saying that the country where I come from should be wiped off the map, then just belief in change and faith is not enough. I would like to see a robust agreement that will curtail Iran from getting to a nuclear bomb. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Professor Gross. Tom Hanson.
Yeah. As I said in my remarks, a key challenge going forward will be to assure the security of our close allies in the Middle Eastern region as we pursue these larger perspectives and huge changes going out globally right now as a global power, as we have to do. And looking ahead, I'd like to recall a moment in 2008. I think this could become potentially interesting. At that time, Jacques Chirac, outgoing French president, said, look, Iran is rational. He disputed this idea of an irrational power. They can be deterred, i.e., maybe they will get a bomb. And at that point, Charles Krauthammer issued what he called the Holocaust Declaration, saying that if Iran gets the bomb, the declaration shall be, it shall be the policy of the U.S. to regard any nuclear attack upon Israel by Iran or originating in Iran as an attack by Iran on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon Iran, i.e. nuclear guarantee for Iran in the worst case analysis. Hillary Clinton made this a plank in her campaign in 2008, embraced this concept.
Okay. Dr. Flowery.
Thank you. You know, one thing we recognize, I think, and it was Joe Lieberman who pointed out to us that the White House repeatedly argued that sanctions would isolate the United States and would alienate our allies. We found out that wasn't true. Also said that stopping the flow of oil from Iran would affect the global economy, that we weren't going to have an economic recovery on the global scale, and that wasn't true. We seem to be more afraid of asserting ourselves and the things that we think are most important. I think we need to look ahead. You know, the White House, for example, has said Congress should do nothing. When the Congress passed the bill requiring its oversight, you know, it's right on the border. I think this is a chance for Congress to really have careful deliberation, not crazy debate, not follow party lines for either side, but make intelligent decisions. When we can hear all sides of issues, we have the good ideas before us, we can make good decisions.
Thank you. Thank you. First, thank you all for a really, and I want to thank the panelists for an informed and very civil discussion on an issue that really excites a lot of passion. And I think, please join me in thanking our panelists for their presentations. Thank you. And it's now I want to now relinquish the floor to Stu Ackman from UNA, who I think will have some closing remarks.
Well, thank you. I think for me, I can take a deep breath right about now. This is quite an interchange between the panelists, and thank you, Eric, for doing such a great job of mentoring this through and supporting the event. So, thank you. We had some other co-sponsors that I'd like to mention: the Jewish Community Relations Council, Minnesota and the Dakotas, Citizens for Global Solutions, the Minnesota International Center, and the Workable World Trust. So we appreciate all their support and help in this. I don't know how far this little poll thing got around, but it was a chance to say what you felt about this agreement before and after the debate. And so if you would fill it out, or if you don't have one, ask for one in the back and drop it off. And if you have a comment, we'd be happy to receive that as well. One other thing, way back somewhere in the, I think, mid-2000s, I was on the board of the United Nations Association of USA, and there was this kind of odd thing going on. The leadership of UNA and other people in the diplomatic ranks would go off to Switzerland and have these meetings with some Iranians. And I think in some way this started the conversation happening that eventually evolved to at least that we could have serious negotiations around an agreement. So in some small way, United Nations Association started that off. The UN, as we know, is a wonderful but somewhat flawed organization. We think that the principles that the UN is founded on are still important today and will be forevermore. To save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind. To reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and the worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women and of nations large and small. To establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, particularly appropriate to this evening, and promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. So on that note, I hope this was beneficial. I hope that we've all received a clearer and better and deeper understanding of this set of issues that was before us this evening, and thank you very, very much for coming. And to Congressman Keith Ellison and his staff member, and Karen, thank you for coming as well. That's it. You want to say something? Okay. Okay, you too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oren.